Let's date forever. Here's your weekly dose of relationship fuel with Sammy and Nathan Yeager. Hello and welcome to Date Forever. In this week's episode, we're chatting about understanding different relationship blueprints and how to shape your own, exploring your attachment style and how this applies to your relationships, and how airing little issues with your partner early can help prevent long-term harm. But before we dive into that, Sammy, what's been fueling you up this week?
This week contained one of my favourite days of the year.
Oh, what's that?
Sydney Mardi Gras Parade.
What a fun time.
And this year it was on extra OTT because the parade was falling inside World Pride Festival. So the whole world was looking at Sydney for the event, the biggest, I think it's the biggest event that Sydney hosts outside of New Year's Eve. So like literally hundreds of thousands of people flocked to Oxford Street Precinct to watch quite literally hundreds of floats that represent the various communities from within the rainbow community in Sydney. And it is fabulous. It is glitters, sparkles, music, pop, sugar, spice, so much love and so much inclusion. And for me, it's just this beautiful moment every year where those that are not seen get to be seen. And I love drag queens and dancing and sparkles and glitter and going out in lingerie.
Yeah, it is such a fun event. And I think the thing that I love about it most is that there is a group for everything. There is people for everything. And it's really just about trying to find your people. Like if there's something out there that you're feeling and you feel like you might be alone, you are not alone. There is a group for everything.
Yeah, and it was so fun because I had some girlfriends visiting from Melbourne. We had some visitors staying with us, and it was just a fabulous weekend or a couple of days really leaning into World Pride celebration, some of the events that were on. So that really fueled me up. Quality time with my friends and a big, big, big celebration of love.
That's what fueled me up too. So on that note, let's dive into this week's episode.
Today we've got Dr Kathrine Bejanyan joining us. Dr Kathrine runs a private therapy practice focusing on relationships, which has helped thousands of people develop a healthier, happier love life. Through individual or couples counselling, she shows her clients how dating and romantic relationships really work and how they can use this newfound knowledge to create long-term romantic relationships they draw strength and love from, not pain and confusion. Welcome to the show, Kathrine.
Hi, guys. Great to be on here.
Thank you so much for joining us. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. But I want to go right back to the beginning. How did you get interested in relationships?
Well, okay. So I know everybody has these amazing stories of how they discovered their career. And I really sort of stumbled into it. I knew psychology was always my thing. I was doing sort of pre-med when I was at university. And then I realized I keep skipping out on all of my pre-med classes and then for fun, going to my psychology courses. Mm-hmm. And so it dawned on me that your career doesn't have to be painful. You can actually like it. And so I dropped the pre-med. Yeah. And I sort of took psychology courses. And then I hadn't intended on necessarily focusing on romantic relationships, but the first place I worked in was a domestic violence sexual assault agency. I was interested at that time, sort of women's issues, empowerment issues. And I started to very quickly learn there about relationships. Obviously, sort of it was all about toxic relationships. And there I realized that it's not a lack of knowledge necessarily people are missing, because I thought, look, I have all this great knowledge about what healthy relationships are like. I'm going to go in there and empower all these individuals, and then they'll be happily on their way. And what I quickly realized is that there's a lot more to relationships than just knowledge. It's about your own internal experience. So what I started to see was that I would say 99 to 100% of the people I work with, the more toxic their adult romantic relationships, the more chaotic their childhoods and abusive their childhoods were. And that really started to spark my interest in like deeper type of work, really understanding someone's background, really understanding how their frame of the world had come to be, their understanding of themselves, their experience of themselves, their sense of worth, what they understood a relationship to be, what it should feel like. If you're in a chaotic home, chaotic relationships are normal in your adult life. So that really started to get me to take deeper interest. And then I ended up moving to Hawaii because, why not? And there I continued my training process, and I started to work with the military in a similar sort of capacity, working with families into domestic violence. And then I started to see that a lot of couples that were intercultural. So a soldier would get stationed somewhere for a few years in another country. They'd meet someone, eventually fall in love, get married, and then they'd have to eventually move to the US. And that's where I would end up seeing them. And I started to see discrepancies between this couple. So issues that came up with from their own cultural upbringing. So once they started to get past that like falling in love phase and actually building a life together, there they started to experience a lot of difficulties. The more the cultural gap, the more different the two cultures, the harder they found it to try to navigate in terms of having to build a life together. So I was just really sort of taken back by that. And I thought, okay, so much of our beliefs and our insights affect how we love, who we choose, and how we build a relationship. It's not just about love. We all have a different experience of love. We also all have a different experience of what a great relationship should look and feel like. And so that eventually led me to London, where I did sort of a PhD in cross-cultural psychology or cross-cultural romantic relationships. And I looked at a lot of East, West, and different sort of belief systems around finding a partner, marriage, long-term relationships. So in that way, then it just was a natural next progression to set up a private practice where I started to just specialize in this area, especially I think with modern professionals. They've got their career really together, but in particularly in London and so, a metropolitan city like this, lots of people have figured out how to progress in their career advancements, but are really struggling to figure out how to develop a loving and committed and solid relationship.
I love so much of what you've shared there, like your journey, but there were so many things that you touched on. And a big part of why we started the Date Forever podcast was this idea that you had been handed a blueprint that maybe you weren't that interested in recreating. Where do you go and get a new one? How do you go and create the framework for a really healthy, happy, thriving relationship if one has never been modeled to you and you don't really know where to even start?
And I guess the thing is, like, even in your home life, like, even if you have had a relationship that you do want to model, you might not necessarily know what was happening sort of behind closed doors to actually make that work. And so even if, you did have a happy upbringing and parents that are still together and seem to have a loving relationship on the outside, you really don't actually know what's going on behind the curtains.
That's a really good point. There's so many. I was just seeing someone yesterday that came from a really sort of what she felt was a solid home life. And she said part of the problem, though, is that they never fought in front of us. So whenever she's in a relationship and there's conflict, she's sort of really confused as to what to do about it, how to manage it, and immediately starts to think there must be problems if we're having conflict. So, and I think, when you look at previous generations, the things that they valued in a relationship aren't necessarily what we value today in modern relationships. People back 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago wanted to get together and create families and have kids. And there was a sort of a complementary to their idea of sort of coming together and creating a home together. Whereas nowadays, it's really about an emphasis on the couple and how well we get along and how emotionally intimate we are and how close we are and how passionate. I mean, if you talk to your grandparents about how emotionally close they were together and how they managed the excitement and the passion long term, a lot of them just, there's like, it wasn't about that. Relationships back then weren't about that. So even if we wanted to look at previous relationships, previous like functional, healthy relationships, I think it's more complicated for us today than it ever was before for parents, grandparents, and et cetera.
Yeah, I love that you've shared that, because like the idea of like the hierarchy of needs, like what is it that we've been seeking from like the institution of marriage has changed so much in, like a handful of decades. And I know that when we talk about like what is marriage for now, we're looking for people who are like your best friend, your ultimate cheerleader, the person who's going to push you to become like the best version of yourself that you can possibly be, and your co-parent and your lover and your confidant and your coach and your
providing all this safety and security and stability and everything like that, but also the fun and adventure and spontaneity and all the like completely opposite contrasting things. We're expecting our partners to be all of those things.
So I think it's really interesting to think like, when we're entering relationships, I'm not even sure that we know that that's what it is that we're seeking. And I think there's probably people who enter into relationships thinking that their expectations are one thing, and then their partner has a totally different set of expectations. And I'm sure that's amplified even more with that cross-cultural piece that you mentioned, where what's been modeled to them has been potentially completely different.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just even if you don't have a cultural difference in the background, the way we are able to live now with the multiple options and sort of kind of create our life as we want it, whether we want to work, whether we want to move to a different city, who we hang out with, what have tastes in music, and all these things that were kind of sort of predetermined almost for us, because we grew up in the same town, we're around the same people that thought like us, looked like us. And so we sort of easily adopted similar value systems, whereas there's so much more movement. And even if you are in the same town, because of what online has been able to provide us, our mind is just more expansive. So the choices we make, the things that we have accessible to us to change us and create very individual, unique individuals is really different from before. So two people could have, like, let's say in London, grown up in London and date and think, yeah, we have similar ideas. But actually the amount of things that have been, choices that have been available to them have shifted how they are. And the devil's in the details, I always say. So when you're actually dating, it's really, really important to be able to really sort of get in the nooks and crannies and really try to understand each other at a deeper level, because you can't take anything on the surface anymore like you used to back in the day. We just didn't have as much variation in our personalities and our likes and dislikes and all of that we do nowadays. So it's much harder to find a good fit. But when you do, it's more exciting because the fit is a lot more unique, right? It's very unique, and you get to sort of feel like you are really creating a life that is tailored to you guys. And that's exciting, whereas people sort of were handed down scripts back in the day. But those who sort of struggle to know how to figure themselves out and really ask the right questions and date correctly to find out really on a deeper level who their partner is, will hit a lot of problems as they move forward and try to create a life together.
I want to go back to something that you said really early on about your experience working in domestic violence situations and that parallel between really traumatic, chaotic childhoods to then those kind of repeating those kind of patterns and experiences in your romantic relationships. That's a big part for me why I'm so passionate about having these conversations about better relationships, because I can see how great the ripple effect is of just two people having a really great, healthy, happy, thriving relationship versus if they don't. Because when they don't, their children, if they have children, that ripple effect goes out one more ring, that it impacts their community, it impacts their workplaces, their friendship groups, all of those things. Yes. And then it amplifies, right? If those children are then modeled a not healthy relationship, it continues on and on and on. So for me, this is not just like that I want mine and Nate's relationship to be better as a result of having these conversations and broadcasting them to the world, and then the world listening and them making changes. I think a lot about the ripple effect of if we all had better relationships, how much better would our world be?
Yeah. So I think that's an important thing for everybody to sort of recognize, because one of the things I sort of will get sometimes when people come into like sessions is sort of this guilt that they're like self-indulging, right? That they are actually self-centered somehow by trying to do this kind of work. And they'll hear that as well from a lot of sort of like the older generations, like parents or grandparents, that We didn't have therapy like we do nowadays. And it feels like therapy is so sort of self-centered and self-indulgent. Like how much can one talk about themselves? And what I really try to make clear to all my clients is that the more accountability you're able to take on yourself, to really like to be able to understand yourself deeply, to be able to own your actions, to be able to clear up any wounds from the past, the better you show up as an individual and the less burden you put on other people, loved ones, and such to handle your issues, right? Because you don't know unconsciously how your issues are coming up. You might have sensitivities to certain places, you've experienced hurts in the past, someone's betrayed you and things like that. And so someone says the wrong thing that unconsciously hits that spot and you're going to react to that. Right. And so, and then you have to now repair that relationship, or the other person is hurt because they don't get why you had such a bad reaction to what they felt like was a benign statement. So that's the process of therapy, is really being able to help you understand yourself on a deeper level and to clean up anything that needs to be cleaned up so that you can just show up in the world lighter, happier, more easygoing, and every interaction and what you put out in the world is so much more positive. So I see it as anything but self-indulgent. I see it as your personal work to put what you're going to put out there in the world in a more responsible and conscious and kinder, compassionate way.
I feel like it would be really hard to overstate the impact of relationship health, relationship education, like globally. Like I feel like we have this big global problem to solve. And I guess having these conversations is just one part of that. What do you see are the other contributing factors to, I guess, overall elevating our level of like emotional literacy? Yeah, just relationship fundamental skills.
I think I really like the way that you put that it's sort of, it's globally necessary. And if anything, we're trying to do so much for the world on so many like external types of ways, but a lot of the harm that's done is through our own belief systems and our like thinking that creates issues. So imagine, if we like really focused on that internal stuff and really worked on healing some of that stuff, we wouldn't be having to put out so much negativity to then have to go find the most mechanical and external ways to fix what we're creating. It's like we're creating problems and then having the secondary challenge of then like going and finding ways to sort of fix the symptoms. But a lot of the issues that you see in the world, are symptoms of our internal disarray, right? Just like in romantic relationships, like I said, I realized that it's not like a lack of knowledge. It's having to help people fix and heal their internal world. And then through that, then they just easily and more fluidly make better choices and end up showing up better. So I think in terms of what people can do is one of the challenges I think I see now sort of like correlating with the movement towards acknowledging more mental health issues is my concern is that enough emphasis isn't put on figuring out how to heal that. It's about being aware of it, right? Being aware that mental health is such a big problem nowadays, that people really suffer anxieties and depressions and all kinds of things. But it seems like enough isn't done about, okay, what are the contributing factors that lead to this? And how do we fix that rather than just acknowledge it and see it in someone? What are we doing about actually trying to not just put a Band-Aid on the issue and say, oh, okay, I see that you are struggling. Why don't you take a week off? But beyond that, and things like social media and stuff that are massively harming people's mental health, creating sense of lack of worthiness, self-esteem issues, just creating a fantasy world that's not real. And we don't seem to even like kind of touch on it, but not in a really serious and realistic way that we need to. I mean, one of the huge problems that I see with like the couples that come in, or even individuals that are looking for love, is social media has skewed their perception about what a relationship is supposed to look and feel like. So they are perpetually searching for something that's not real, that it doesn't exist. So they go on date after date, exhaust themselves, or have one problem after another, and then go, this is because what I'm experiencing doesn't look like what other people are experiencing, and therefore it must be wrong, right? And so it completely helps them or sort of hinders them from understanding what they should be looking for. So you're kind of sort of a ship out in sea, not knowing what direction you're going into, and the wind is just blowing you left and right, and you're expending a lot of energy, doing a lot of work, but not going in the right direction. So yeah, I think that people's awareness about maybe some of these mental health issues, like where they stem from and what you can actually do about it, needs more discussion.
So it sounds like that there's almost the two ends of the spectrum, or two ends of your life almost, that are really influential in your relationships. It's kind of as a kid growing up and what you've been exposed to and what is around you at that area, or that end of your life, and then also what you're exposed to right here and now and what you're seeing on social media and things like that. So if you do have a bit of a warped perception, or you haven't had a good blueprint that, like in your past, you don't want to recreate, but also you're seeing all of this other stuff on social media about all these what look like magical relationships, but are probably unattainable. How do you actually go about creating a blueprint that might work for you, or even understanding what you want your own blueprint to look like?
So first and foremost, I'd say you need to understand what are the blocks and obstacles that are in your way, because in order to create a new blueprint, you need to know like where the old blueprint isn't sort of working, right? And this is the hardest part, because people don't know what they don't know. So they don't know what is like wrong with their blueprint.
Because if they got brought up in that was normal.
Yes.
That wasn't,
yes,
that
exactly.
I lived that, I breathed that. I just assume that everybody's living some version of that.
Or if they're surrounded by that in social media as well, that's the normal.
Yes,
that's
exactly it. Yeah. And that's the process of sort of therapy, or the sort of self-development world that I think that it can get a bad rap, the self-development world, because it's almost sort of like sometimes turned into a quick fix as well. But you're really going to have to go on like a deeper journey and retreat from the external stuff. So anything that's like a quick fix, like 5 ways to fix your, whatever, or do this and that, I'd say just like stay away from that, right? Or take those tips and actually do deeper research into what that really is saying. No one can fix their life 5 easy steps. Those 5 easy steps sound easy, like gain more awareness would be, let's say, one of the steps to becoming a healthier person. Okay, how do you gain awareness? Like, what does that mean? And that, if you wanted to gain more awareness of yourself, is like a deep dive into lots of sort of reading psychological books, getting insights into friends and family, really paying attention to lots of your feelings, journaling and stuff. That's where that work begins, of what's agitating me, what's making me unhappy, what am I worried about? That's kind of the direction. What are my fears? That's the direction you want to take. You want to start to unravel those negative emotions and see what are at the source of it. So if I'm thinking, I'm looking at these people, I'm never going to have this kind of relationship, or every relationship I've had has fallen apart, I've been dumped, or they've been emotionally unavailable, the next step would be, okay, why? To ask the why question. Why, right? Is it me or is it them? What is it? And start to try to work on that. I will say it's a really difficult and long process, but one that's really rewarding. And there's no like endpoint. It's not like, okay, I'll have to do this work for 10 years and then I'll get the life I want. As you start to do it, your life starts to improve one by one, and the process and the journey and the momentum picks up and it's easier. But get someone to help you. If you can have the time and the finances to be able to afford a therapist or someone that does deeper work. If you're interested in a healthy relationship, you're going to need to do a bit of the deeper work. Get someone that can guide you through the process.
Yeah. And if you don't have those financial means available to you, there are incredible doctors, researchers, coaches who have written books, and they've put their life's work into a $20 or $30 book, and that might be 3 or 5 hours worth of reading. It's an incredibly great investment. And if that's even too much for you, go and listen to the podcasts that those people have been on. They've taught, they've shared their insights, their lessons, their theories, their methodologies, their modalities in so many different ways. The internet's a glorious place, as long as you're putting it through that filter of, is this right for me? Everything, not everything is for everyone.
it's the application of that too. Like that's what I want to emphasize, and what I emphasize to all my clients as well, that even that come to therapy, I really try to explain that like therapy is just scratching the surface. Like we can uncover some of the stuff you need to work on, but the change happens in between when you actually work on it, right? And I sort of say it's similar to like hiring, let's say, a trainer or nutritionist to get you into better health, physical health. They'll give you the information in that hour, but what you do with your rest of the week is like really matters, right? If you don't apply the knowledge, then you're not going to get anything. And so if you are reading the books and watching the podcasts and stuff, you have to make time to apply the things that they are actually saying and start to work on that. That's the only way the change will happen.
Yeah, I really like that you said that, because I think there's a bit of like productivity porn for, I don't know if that's like the right term. Totally. It kind of it kicks around, but like, you know, I read 100 books this year and I like went to this many seminars or whatever. Like, so me personally, it's probably almost 5 years ago now that I started reading, personal development, professional development, biographies, stories from leaders, people who had done things that I either admired or would like to do in my life, or have overcome hurdles or areas of their life that they wanted to be better and they figured it out. But it was, probably about 5 years ago that I really started reading those kinds of books. And I went through some of seeing that of like, oh my God, all these CEOs are reading 100 books a year or whatever, like what's the right sort of amount? For me, I kind of landed on, like the volume of books that I can read is one thing, but the volume of books that I can read and take away 4 or 5 lessons from each book and meaningfully apply them. And for me, I've landed on, I can read about 2 books a month, and that 2 books a month, I can take away a couple of ideas from each one and meaningfully apply that to some area of my life. And it was a bit like what you said before about you start that and you sort of start to adapt habits or practices or these little layers and things that just become the fabric of who I am now. I think about my gratitude practice as one of those things. Like I read this idea in a book by The Happiness Advantage, Sean Aker, and now it's like this 1 or 2 minute thing that I do every single day. And I've been doing it for 5 years, but it's now just one of a handful of things that I do consistently for that incremental growth. And we just improve by, even a couple of % each year, you end up being a totally different person.
Totally. And I think that like 2 books a month is infinitely better than 100 books a month if you're going to apply the information that So, and there is something about that kind of like, as you said, productivity porn, like I can easily do that as well. If I'm just like moving around, cooking or whatever, I'll put on podcasts in the background and it makes me feel really good in the moment. Like I'll get ideas and stuff will start to set in, and then like it's done. If like I don't capture that moment, then it's done. And like a dopamine hit, like I feel good, I feel productive, but you aren't actually, right? You're not being productive in an effective long-term way. So doing something like that, I had a friend that talked to me about how he manages this. So he's very sort of logical, and I love his approach to it. But he sort of sat down and said, okay, and this is a few years ago, how does he, at the beginning of the year, he thought, I want certain areas in my life to improve. So I want better relationship with my family members. I want to be more well-read and wider knowledge base. And he had a couple of more things. And then he went through, okay, how am I actually going to practically accomplish that? So for the developing better relationships with family members, he literally had like twice a week call these people and have a 5-minute check-in. And with the books, he had a category of like 3-4 categories that he wasn't well versed in, and he would sort of write down, okay, once a month at least pick one category and make sure. And he just continued, and he was just ticking off on an Excel sheet, continuing to tick it off. And it's like when you say develop better relationships, like that's it. If you have regular and meaningful contact with family members, by the end of the year, you are going to have a better relationship. So there has to be some kind of concrete action plan as to how you're going to accomplish this sort of shift and change in you. And the more vague things like the relationships, the emotional stuff, the harder it is to like make any changes without pinpointing anything down. So yeah, really, really important to have action plans to everything.
Yeah. Kathrine, I want to dig a little bit deeper into something that you said earlier about, like, I think you used the phrase like to heal your inner self. Is that the language that you use?
Yeah.
And we talked a little bit about, like increasing some self-awareness, digging into, what motivated that behavior. Why did I respond that way? Is that how I would have liked to respond?
Yeah.
But can you talk to us a little bit about like, if someone's heard that term and they're gone, interesting, what does that actually mean? Like, what's something that you can recommend for someone to actually tactically go and do to start that journey?
One of the first things I would say is the easiest place to start right now, and it's a hot sort of topic at the moment, is like attachment theory.
Mm-hmm.
Go out and try to understand, but like not the sort of, again, the surface level way we like talk about it, which is anxious attachments are like this, but really, really try to understand, start to like read the book Attached. That's a good starting point. And it will give you a breakdown of, let's say, if you're anxiously attached, that your feelings, the things that come up in a relationship that make your alarm system go off, and then the way you respond to that, you can start to see actually how quite unhelpful and destructive that process can be. And just in starting to work on that, regulating your emotions, having other ways of trying to self-soothe, that in itself is a really strong starting point to help you gain some internal like awareness and start to like work on it. And that's like applied across the board. Now, I don't know how, like, it depends on how deeply you've been wounded. If there is some real like trauma and stuff, because attachment theory, it sort of covers all bases. But if your attachment issues, like you were actually like abused on a sort of a severe level, the actual work of regulating your emotions is really, really, really tough. Really tough. When those like, when the anxiety comes up, trying to regulate that on your own is a really difficult process. So I would recommend getting some help, because sometimes having this knowledge and then starting to recognize when you're doing it can actually develop sort of anger towards yourself, right? Because you now know what you're doing, but you can't seem to stop it. And you start to sort of feel frustrated at yourself. You start to feel hopeless, just kind of like going on a diet or something and having unhealthy cravings for sort of like sugar and all of that, which is developed into an addiction. And then going, right, I need to stop. And then every time you eat any of that stuff, berating yourself for having done it. We have to understand actually the brain has developed these addictions, and it's almost like out of your control at that point to make choices. So not to berate ourselves. So that's where I'd say maybe get some support from external, whether it's therapists or family members and stuff that recognize you are going through a process of trying to figure this out and help heal yourself, and turning to them for support if those alarm systems go off, to at least have someone you can call or whatever to sort of soothe you, calm the internal world down. And in the same vein, stay away from talking to people that cause more agitation in you. Really, really be careful. Like, that's one of my rules of thumb when people come in here, is that out of this space, you're no longer discussing this issue with other people. Because what I notice is when it comes to relationships and things like that, well-meaning family and friends tend to aggravate the situation a lot worse. Oh my God, I can't believe he did that, or she said that. Oh my God, and it's that, like, it just elevates in the moment. It's like gratifying to feed the anger, but the more you elevate the negative emotions, the harder it is going to be to reason through it. So like, whatever you're doing, whether it's people you're going to or activities you're doing that are aggravating the negative feelings, you're going in the wrong direction. You got to have to like find ways to soothe it.
Yeah. On our show, we've talked about this idea of like the fueled up life, and the sort of 8 different areas in your life that you really need to take care of and be proactive with. And your romantic relationship being a big part of that. But Nathan and I have always said that your relationship with yourself sets the tone for every other relationship that you have. And that's so much of what we're talking about here, right? Is like really deeply knowing yourself, understanding yourself, but then treating yourself with love and kindness, and dating yourself as you would another person. And I'm really interested, like, this is your wheelhouse, this is what you do. What are you doing in your relationship with yourself to keep it fueled up?
So I let my relationship with myself go for a couple of years, like during COVID, because you could work from home. Oh my God, that was,
I don't think that's
terrible
an
without
uncommon
any
thing.
limits. Oh God, like I think one of the areas I have to always watch is that I'm incredibly sort of like classic workaholic and really driven. So if I don't put a structure around that, it gets out of hand. And I think during COVID, because I had free reign, like no one was allowed to go out. That's one way, like it's a Friday night, I should go out and see friends and stuff. They can put some kind of structure, but without that, and I was sort of like, my client circle was just expanding and I was getting clients from all over the world. So I could be up at 6 a.m. to be able to see Australia clients at like starting at 8 a.m. and then go all the way down to sort of 9:30, 10. And eventually that started to really burn me out. And I didn't even recognize it because this stuff creeps up on you, but started to have like anxieties, waking up in the middle of the night and just anxious and couldn't. And I've never had mental health issues. So it was starting to like really worry me. And eventually I started to like do some testing and I realized my cortisol is really high. It peaks in the middle of the night at 3, 4 a.m. That's why I'm getting up. And I was like, oh, got to really like make some serious changes.
And so you had all the tools in your toolbox.
Yeah.
Like
that's what I was going to say. I was just about to say,
right?
like, because I was focused on the external goals, like I wanted to expand my practice. And also it's really gratifying doing the work I do. Like I love talking to my clients. So because I enjoy that process, I think sometimes we think, oh, burnout is when we start to really we don't like our work or we're having to put in extra work and not think about ourselves. But to me, it was like, I was thinking about ourselves. This is work I love doing. I'm stuck at home, not able to do anything. Why not actually have these incredibly meaningful conversations? But what I wasn't paying attention to is what was mentally felt gratifying physically was like taking a toll. And I was ignoring that until, my body sort of went haywire and then I couldn't ignore it anymore. So I'm really careful now about like the mornings. So I function best and I'm most productive in the mornings. So I will usually, firstly, I reduced client hours by about half. It eventually got to where I had to do that. I do like meditation several times a day, and I'm really strict about that. Initially, I've been doing it for years on and off. But when this happened, I was like, okay, I've really got to get serious about it. And the consistency has really helped. Just like physically working out, you don't see the benefits when you're inconsistent with it. But when you're consistent, you then start to feel it. So at this point, as soon as I even sit down for a meditation, like my mind has now already associated it with relaxation. So I can sort of immediately feel relief, which is really interesting. And that's what drives me now to do it more, because my body has adjusted and knows what this is and is very now responsive. So that journaling and just reading a lot. I will make sure to do reading it's not so much about my work related as in how to be more productive, or like it's less about thinking in that way and something more sort of soulful, where I feel like it sort of helps me. Like Jungian stuff does that a lot for me. Jungian type of therapy, stories and stuff where you start to see that the journey of life is a struggle and it is this way, and something about that, and the human connection, and that we're all kind of the same and we're all connected, like really soothing for me. So I found ways that, and of course connecting with people and hanging out and stuff, but anything that soothes my internal world, like I was saying, like anything that's soothing and calming is what I now have like consistently do to keep the mental aggravation of like doing this kind of work. Your mind is always operating, right? And it feels really enlivening because it's like, oh, I think better. I think more critically, and my thinking is better, but it actually was taking away from the body and the heart. And that's what I'm trying to more incorporate, things that then also feed the body and the heart.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's really worthwhile to recognize like this is in your wheelhouse. This is what you do.
Yeah.
And then you still in global pandemic, very trying times, struggled. So I think I just want to applaud you for sharing that. I really appreciate it because I know that you're not alone in that. You've obviously worked with hundreds, if not thousands of couples now. I'm curious, like, is there a maybe less common practice, habit, tip, skill worth mastering that you would recommend for our listeners to lean in and learn?
Well, I would say particularly for your guys' podcast, because it seems to be geared towards young couples, right, that are sort of recently together, sort of under 10 years, I would gauge. That's an amazing starting point, because you haven't practiced bad habits long term yet to have, like really like difficulty in undoing it. So when I get couples that have been together a couple of years, I love the fact that they're being like that proactive in wanting to come in and look at things. So one of the things I really recommend is having weekly sessions when you sort of like sit down, and it really doesn't have to take long, and it doesn't have to be sort of a serious like thing, but you can sort of sit down, even with like a cup of tea or glass of wine, and just have a chat about the week and what each of you felt that, was positive, was difficult, and in relating to your own selves and with the other person. Like, did I say anything that was off-putting? But building that habit of like talking and trying to consciously bring to mind any little petty things like that you can clean up before it becomes a problematic. What I tend to see with couples that are fairly new is they don't want to rock the boat. So those little things that you said something when we were out with friends, and it made me feel like I looked bad, or, was telling a story and you kind of interrupted, and I know, you said that thing and it was kind of a joke in the moment, but actually like that kind of hurt and stuff. Those kinds of things, like when we're in the beginning of a relationship, the moment passes and we want to let it go because we really, we care about this person. We want to sustain the stability of the relationship. But if you don't get in the habit of sharing those things, they really build up. They not only really build up, so that two things happen. They build up over time. So imagine those little things that your partner does that kind of just tiny bit aggravate you, but consistently over 5-10 years time, right? It's no longer just a little aggravation. Now that muscle in you has been worn down, and this like rage and anger is coming up. So you're angry, you start to see them in a bad light, right? You don't care about me. You're disrespectful to me. It's no longer, you said that thing it's because you were disrespectful. You're a disrespectful person. You're careless, right? It starts to become a character flaw that you see in your partner, and they didn't even get an opportunity to change this. So you live with an aggravation and misconceptualize them, and things aren't given the opportunity to change just because you wanted to keep the stability in the moment. So yeah, that's where. And the other thing that then happens as a result of that, because you two aren't talking about little conflicts like that, which are very easy to fix, right? That thing that you keep saying, please stop saying it, or that way that you interact with me, please stop, like fairly small. If you don't know how to manage that and deal with that and like be able to sit in discomfort on such a small thing and be able to clear it up, you won't know once the actual big issues come along. You'll have no idea how to like communicate that, right?
Yeah.
Because those big issues, let's say you want to have discussions around money. A lot of people are really uncomfortable talking about finances and stuff. So now we're trying to figure out how we're going to be together and merge our lives together, and how our spending habits, things like that can feel a little uncomfortable. Well, if you can't even tell them, I don't like it when you do that small thing, how the heck are you going to say, I don't know if I like the way you spend your money, right? And we're going to have issues there. So you want to, it's a muscle of sitting in discomfort together and being able to work through things. You want to develop that muscle early on when the problems are really small. It's like going to the gym and weight training, right? You start off small and then you build that weight of just like your body can take the weight of it. It's the same thing with emotionally heavy issues. You have to build so your emotions can tolerate heavy weight of problems. If you don't, you'll just keep avoiding it, because that's what you're strengthening, the avoidance of talking about these issues, and then they'll come out in really, really destructive, unproductive ways.
Yeah, I love this so much. And I think what you mentioned there was like, obviously, like for one person, there's this resentment which has been building for 1, 2, 3, 5, 10 years. But on the flip side as well, there's obviously the habits from the other person that have been reinforced for 10 years. And so it's not just like a struggle for one person, it's then going to be a struggle for the other person as well to undo those habits that have been ingrained for who knows how many years.
That's right.
And so it becomes much more difficult for both parties to get over that resentment, but then also to change habits that have been ingrained for so long too.
Yeah. I always think about this, might be like downplaying it a little bit, but I always think like when you're in the car and you've got the GPS going, you want the GPS to tell you that you've taken a wrong turn immediately after you've taken the wrong turn.
Yes.
Not
Perfect.
10 kilometers down the road,
Yes.
not 100 kilometers down the road. Like I want the opportunity to correct this route immediately.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Exactly that. But it's just people thinking, and back to social media and movies and stuff. It's people thinking that a good relationship should be smooth and it should be happy. We should always be happy and having fun together, right? And so when they're introducing conflict, when they're introducing what they feel like is negative topics, like, oh, I'm being destructive towards my relationship, right? This person might want to break up with me and stuff. And that's what they want to avoid. But strength is built through gradual increases of conflict in a relationship, right? If your relationship is never tested by anything negative, it's a really fragile happiness. The second something comes up, things might fall apart. But those relationships where people are willing to sort of face negativity, sit in negativity together, have arguments and try to figure it out. Once they do and figure out, like they realize how to actually have those conflicts and work through things, they're really strong and durable relationships in the long run, really strong and durable relationships. So conflict-free makes your happiness really, really fragile.
I would agree with that. And I would say that was the state of mine and Nate's relationship in our first few years. Like we really didn't fight. We fought quite a bit in our first year, but like year 2, 3, 4, not very much at all. And I do think a lot of that was artificial harmony with neither of us, like what you just described, like not wanting to rock the boat, didn't want to lose the other person. And I think that there was a lot of things that we both weren't saying. And now we're really good at saying uncomfortable things to each other and having quite constructive, quite healthy conflict. And we're also a lot better at repairing after that conflict. So even bigger things don't steal as much time from us as maybe some little things did early on. So I can't thank you enough for sharing that. I think that's such a valuable muscle to build. To say thank you for joining us, we've actually given a week's worth of classroom education to some children in Borneo. This is a really incredible project because it also focuses on girls who may not always get the opportunity to go to school. And we know that when we educate girls, they lift up their communities and families and therefore the world. So thank you so much for making that possible.
Thank you guys for putting that in. That's awesome.
Oh, no worries. Yeah. So, Kathrine, if people want to connect with you or learn a little bit more about what you do, how can they do that?
They can sort of go to my website, which is just my full name, KathrineBejanyan.com. Be mindful of Kathrine because I think people put in, it's spelled with an E usually in the middle, but mine isn't. So Kathrine. And so go to my website and either reach out through a form there or reach out through email, Kathrine@KathrineBejanyan.com. I finally got to a point where I just, based on all of the stuff that, we're talking about and I talked about with my clients over and over again, felt like certain topics were coming up. So I am working on putting a course together, or it's kind of in the process of nearly completion. So if you're looking for a course on sort of dating and how to go about it, what questions to ask, things like that, to get to the heart of the matter and things that we discussed today, how to start to look at ourselves and work on ourselves, that should be coming out in the next couple months. So go check that out. And that would be, one of the starting points that you can implement.
Amazing.
Awesome.
Yeah, as we sort of talked about, go seek information. And if you can, get a coach, get a therapist, get a counselor, get somebody to help you. You don't have to go at unpacking some of these things on your own. And thank you so much for helping us destigmatize some of those things, because huge advocate for, if there's something that you want in your life to be better, get help. There's heaps of help available. So thank you so much.
Thanks heaps for joining us. If you love what we're doing here and want more, subscribe to the Date Forever podcast to make sure you never miss an ep. Come and hang out with us and other awesome couples who are fueling up their relationships in the Thriving Couples Collective Facebook group, or check us out at fuelcollective.com.au. Until next time, keep on dating, because better relationships equal a better world.